Story 1. I found out I was pregnant in January this year. I was afraid of being another stereotype as a young, first-time mother who might be criticized for being careless. I am 31 years old, have already been married and divorced, managed a restaurant, and have a 13-year-old stepdaughter. Story 2. When I got excited about buying a new vacuum, I realized I would rather stay in on a Friday night than go out. Story 3. You're not the king of the world on your birthday. Bad things always happen on my birthday. Either my parents fight or I get yelled at. Either way, the day ends in tears and a bit of trauma every year when I was a kid. Now I'm terrified of my birthday. Story 4. When I got excited about buying a new sponge for the kitchen, I gave it a name. His name is Greg. Greg helps with the dishes and we love Greg. Story 5. I received a substantial paycheck for an odd job I had been looking forward to. On the way home, my mom informed me that the house had been foreclosed, and she needed the money. Apparently, my older siblings were already aware, but no one was job hunting except for me, who was unaware. Story 6. I told my niece she needed adult supervision to do something, and she looked at me as if I were less intelligent than a block of cheese and asked why I couldn't watch her. Story 7. When I climbed up a fence that I usually jumped over, I looked down and it seemed very high. I decided to climb down carefully to avoid getting hurt. I began to realize that I needed to take care of my body instead of just launching myself from high places, trusting I could land safely. It was less about a fear of injury and more about understanding that my knees, feet, and ankles would not tolerate that kind of impact. Story 8. There are many negative comments here, and I was going to join in, but I decided to share something positive instead. I realized I wasn't a child anymore when I was down by the creek behind my parents' house with my kids. I told them that when I was little, I always wanted to have driftwood fires on the rocks by the creek, and then I realized I am an adult. As long as it's a safe burn day, I absolutely could have a driftwood fire with my kids. So I did. We splashed in the creek, sat by the fire to dry off, then put it out and went home. I am an adult, which means if I want to do something fun, for the most part, I don't need to ask. Sure, there are many downsides, but if I want there to be an upside, I can create that to an extent. Story 9. When my dad died when I was 11, there was a distinct change in me. I had a clear thought of, oh, well, I guess I'm in charge of myself now. Story 10. I get worried about 18-year-olds using drugs in a dull club on a boring Friday night. They are just children. Why would they act so carelessly? At a festival or special party, it doesn't matter. I am always super alert about the people around me. I once had to save a 2-meter-tall man because he was about to pass out. Story 11. When the doctor said, "Dad, are you going to catch the baby?" With no prior discussion, he proceeded to guide my bare hands into position. I was stunned, and it happened so fast. Suddenly, there was a baby in my hands. I knew in that moment. Story 12. I asked for identification to buy alcohol at the pub or supermarket. I spent good money obtaining this driving license, and now you won't even allow me to use it to prove my age. Story 13. When the shop assistant went out back, I overheard her say, "There's an elderly man who needs help with his phone bill." Story 14. Knowing that no one was responsible for me, I got off work, drove home, and realized that I could go days without anyone knowing what I was doing. Story 15. My parents had both passed away by the time I was 25. I have no siblings and was not close with other relatives. I had to learn to budget because there was no safety net of asking my parents for money like others I worked with would do. Story 16. When I realized I would prefer to be seated for live music events, I found that I can't stand for hours like I used to. Story 17. When my family sat me down and told me the truth about how difficult things really are at home, including our finances and health. Story 18. When my daughter was born at 740 grams, I also experienced the loss of my stillborn son, whom I carried for 3 days of the month. Story 19. I'm always going to be someone's child. The Christmas my parents gave me towels, household items, and toilet paper wrapped up was basically like saying, "Enjoy moving out." I was moving out in January. I felt devastated. I was 19. Story 20. Being kicked out onto the street on the first day of 7th grade because of the recession and housing crisis was definitely a wake-up call. Story 21. I brought a group of teenage boys to the fair. They nudged each other and pointed at the pretty girls. I found myself looking for young children so I could admire the mothers. Story 22. For me, it was having a child. The sudden responsibility for another human being and putting yourself second to them is a humbling experience. Story 23. When my dad was dying, my mom and brother shut down. I was forced to make medical and end-of-life care decisions. Story 24. My grandfather has stage 4 pancreatic cancer and is likely to pass away any day. The family has chosen me as the spokesperson and representative. I would have thought my dad or aunt would take on this role, but I guess it's time for me to step up, and I'm terrified. I don't feel ready or want to do this, but I'm not a child anymore. Story 25. Stress exists in my life. I was never stressed as a child. As an adult, I couldn't tell you the last time I wasn't stressed. I was probably a child. Story 26. The simple fact that I no longer went to birthday parties with my friends led us to spend more time at the local cinema for celebrations. We gradually drifted away from game consoles, spending less and less time on them. We kept in touch through social media, as one friend had moved abroad, another started a new job, one became a manager at a pizza place, one became a full-time parent, and another joined a religious community and no longer uses social media. We also do not engage in the joys of childhood, as we all faced many challenges together and apart. So yes, it's nice to reminisce about the better and good times. Story 27. When I watch my child and the neighborhood children play, I realize that I am the adult responsible for keeping everyone safe. However, I am also amazed by their energy level, something I haven't experienced in years. Story 28. I went to an all-ages ska show when I was 20. There were actual middle and high school students in the audience and the pit. It struck me that I was no longer a kid, so I could not rely on my youth for help when someone started throwing elbows in the pit. Now I was an adult and I had to go into the pit to ensure the kids got out safely. Story 29. When I realized I could tell people who say, "That's just for kids," to go away. I could probably get sued for suggesting, "If cartoons are for kids, you should show your children Happy Tree Friends." Story 30. For me, it was when my mom passed away. There is no other feeling like it. I have a wonderful father, and I'm grateful to still have him, but the loneliness of being a motherless mother is unreal. Attempting to step into her shoes for holidays and to be the female advice giver to my younger siblings was proof that I had to grow up. She has been gone for 26 years, and I still miss her terribly. Story 31. When girls started reacting negatively towards me and giving me side eye, I thought I was speaking normally. Story 32. I do not care about how long I have been alive. I am short, young, and silly. Feel free to criticize me. Attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder makes it hard to be an adult anyway. Story 33. When all your friends are paired up and people look at you like you're a loser for wanting to go out on a weekday. Story 34. I used to be called child or beta by my uncles and aunties. Now they call me brother or bia, even though they are in their 40s and I am half of their age. Story 35. This wasn't the question, but the moment professional athletes looked like children was when I realized I was getting older. Story 36. I have been working in childcare for about a decade. I am now at the point where I have coworkers who were once in my program as children. Story 37. I tried on clothing at Forever 21 for the first time since I was 19, and I'm 25 now. I wasn't feeling it. Even the more mature styles felt too young for me. Story 38. After the graduation party was over, my dad told me to find a job and set a date for when I would leave their home to have my own place. It was sobering, but the beginning of independence. Story 39. My first thought was that I might still think of myself as a kid. Then I realized I never had the chance to be a kid. Story 40. I had an X-ray done of my back. I couldn't move without experiencing significant pain. The X-ray revealed that I have arthritis. That was a major blow to my self-esteem. Story 41. The first time I was able to help a friend do the kind of things my parents did for me. It has been almost 30 years, so I don't remember anything except the surprise. Story 42. When people started calling the PlayStation 2 a retro gaming system, I have a coworker who has never even seen one in real life. Story 43. When I was in a needle injection class, I accidentally got my hand with it, and my finger bled for several minutes. The teachers didn't seem to care at all. I'm still a teenager, so it's not like I'm very mature yet. Story 44. It may seem a bit silly, but when adults stopped congratulating me for doing something good, it became expected. The expectations only increase with age. Story 45. When I sent off the check for my first mortgage payment on my first house in 2009, I wondered what I had just gotten myself into. I had been renting a room throughout my 20s and felt it was time for me to buy my own house. That first mortgage payment was almost $1,000 more than what I had been paying monthly to rent a room from a friend. Story 46. Making my own doctor's appointments and managing my own insurance. My mom handled all medical matters, and I was just along for the experience. Now I am in control. Story 47. I would say when $100 stopped being a lot of money for me. This indicator may not be as relevant after the rapid rise of inflation over the past few years, but before 2020, it was quite the revelation. Story 48. 12-year-old me, who was 185 centimeters tall at the time, walked in sports gear, a tracksuit, to the bus stop after training. A 3-year-old said something to their mom about me. Story 49. When my mom dropped me off at the Department of Motor Vehicles and left, I thought she would have at least waited with me in the lobby. Story 50. When I realized that I had to feed myself every single day, it was a terrifying realization. I cried in a drive-thru because I was sure I would eventually starve. Story 51. When I realized that my parents were not my legal guardians anymore, I remember my 18th birthday being a little devastating, partly because I received a beautiful cake that tasted terrible, with the cake pop being the best part. Story 52. I never felt like a child, but I remember an era when I was patronized as one. I learned early on that some adults treat children as targets for their abuse and tools at their disposal with little to no regard or respect for their needs. Story 53. Taking responsibility and funding my own life has been a journey. Other than that, I'm still not sure I feel fully grown up at the age of 58. Story 54. When I get physically hurt or sick, I do not heal quickly anymore. I tripped in a hole in a grassy area of a parking lot, and my entire right leg was bruised with deep tissue damage. It took 3 months for the bruising to go away, and I still have occasional problems with my knee. Story 55. It wasn't a moment of sudden realization at the time, but looking back, what stands out is when I moved into residence for school and began to appreciate the freedom of eating whatever I wanted. I also recognized the need to be responsible about what and how much I chose to eat. That's part of growing up. Story 56. Little kids outside the supermarket started calling me "Sir" and asking if I had any promotional cards to spare that the supermarket hands out. Story 57. When I received my only job offer in another city, nearly 200 miles away from my hometown, I had to search for an apartment on my own. Now, I manage my time and commitments along with my salary, household chores, and bills. The only assistance I receive from my parents is that they bring me my mother's cooking and snacks from my culture, and sometimes groceries. Additionally, my parents discuss adult matters with me. Story 58. I used to work in a daycare. One child attempted to insult me but did not do a good job. The other woman who worked with me told him, "You do not talk to an adult like that." That was when I realized, oh yes, I'm an adult. I believe I was 22. Another moment was when I found myself agreeing with the parents in Disney movies. Story 59. The first songs I remember listening to in the 1990s when they were new started playing on classic rock stations. That was an incredibly bad day. Story 60. I thought I would grow up and buy myself all the toys I wanted when I was little. I've lost interest. I can't seem to enjoy the usual things. Trains, magnetic building blocks, racetracks, marble runs, Legos. I'm only 23. It's too early to lose interest. I'm hoping it's just the depression. Story 61. When I got into my first apartment and everyone had left, I was putting things away. The crushing weight of possibly losing this place, having my utilities turned off, and potentially losing my job made me realize I had to figure out how to live. Story 62. When I first held my newborn child at home after all the family had left, it hit me that night. Story 63. I want to end my 15-year relationship that started when I was 20 because he hasn't grown up, but I have. I can't grow with him, and I want to grow now. It's going to be challenging dating as a 36-year-old single woman who still has childlike qualities and only one toxic relationship in my past. Story 64. I had a baby at 19 years old. My boyfriend and I had a child to raise and had to grow up. He got a full-time job and I took a part-time job while attending college. Our families helped with daycare while we worked and attended classes, and my parents assisted with my college tuition. I was fortunate to complete my bachelor's degree with less than $10,000 in student loans, though it took a little longer than originally intended. We lost many friends because they could not understand that raising our child, becoming a family, and building financial stability were our top priorities. We couldn't just get a sitter every weekend to go out and party. Sitters were an expensive luxury we couldn't afford on our low income early on. Coordinating sitters took time, so we couldn't just spontaneously join in plans like we used to. Invitations like, "We're taking Joe out to the bar for his birthday tonight. You should totally come," became less appealing because we needed more than 1 hour's notice. We went out when we could and enjoyed ourselves. Even then, we could see that our lifestyles were very different. The invitations finally stopped after so many declines. Plus, we genuinely enjoyed being parents. Our household was full of love, and we worked hard on our relationship. We strived to be good partners and parents. When we had free time, we wanted to spend it together as a family. My boyfriend is now my husband of 28 years. I'm happy and proud of the work we did as a couple to get where we are today. Our kids are grown and successfully building their own lives and families. I like to think we gave them a solid and positive example throughout the years. Of course, we struggled at times, but we worked through those struggles together. Story 65. I was 18 in the delayed entry program for the Marines, still in high school, working at the movie theater in the mall like teenager stuff. I got off school, picked up my paycheck, cashed it, ran home to get changed for work, and on my way out, I dropped off the money for my share of the car insurance with my parents. I could see in their faces the astonishment that this kid, who just a few short years ago honestly thought that designing Lego sets was a viable career path, was now a working man doing what he needed to do and taking it seriously, and I knew I was an adult. Story 66. Losing a premature baby, our first child, affected me deeply for a while. Even the events of September 11th did not impact me in the same way. Story 67. When I could no longer go full speed through the tubes at the McDonald's playground without scraping the top of my back. Story 68. When I started waking up earlier because I needed to use the bathroom. As a young person, I could sleep for 12 hours if I wanted. Now, there's no way I can do that unless I get a catheter. Story 69. I have experienced several situations where I realized I was the only one with medical skills. Giving orders as a teenager or in my early 20s helped me understand my role. Story 70. When I turned 18, I applied for an accelerated passport, bought a plane ticket to Japan, and then went a month later. I was never stuck in that, am I adulting enough to be considered an adult dilemma that a lot of my peers experience. Currently, I am nearly a 40-year-old, undated, unkissed virgin by accident. No guy I've met wanted me even when I asked. They just see me platonically. People older than me who are married with kids still tell me they don't feel adult enough. I guess they're waiting for their parents to die or something. Maybe that will make them feel more like adults once they have no older person to rely on. Both my parents are alive and loving, and I felt perfectly adult by 18. I assume that's why parents are often absent in fiction, either by being deceased, far away, or difficult, so that the viewers or readers can see the protagonist's independence more clearly. Story 71. I checked my blood pressure after a day of excessive drinking and poor eating. It was very high, Seeing my father struggle with diabetes makes me realize that I am now reaching middle age and can't do things like I did in my college years or when I was in my 30s anymore. Story 72. When I was 13, I started staying up late every night to ensure my mom didn't accidentally harm herself with a cigarette after getting too drunk and falling asleep with it in her hand again. Story 73. The first time I saw the Power Rangers, it was intended for children, and I felt indifferent towards it. Story 74. Even though I was still a kid, when I was 18, I took Amtrak for the first time to see my boyfriend and his family at their beach house for 3 days. When it was time to go back, I mixed up the days and his mom wanted me to leave one day earlier than I thought. I immediately bought the ticket for the day she expected me to leave once I realized the miscommunication. She and my boyfriend dropped me off at the station. He waited with me for the train while she stayed in the car. The track number changed while I was waiting outside, so I missed it. There were no other trains back home for the rest of the day. She screamed, cursed, and cried at my boyfriend to leave me to figure out how to get home on my own. She yelled at me, saying I was a narcissistic person who intentionally missed it to stay another day. She was so angry that she would be home later than expected and get less sleep. This was the first time I felt like a mother, and a woman did not care that I would be stranded overnight in one of the most unsafe cities in America at the train station. Thankfully, my boyfriend at the time stayed with me through all her yelling, called his dad, and his dad got me a hotel room, managing to bypass the age requirement at the hotel. I took a rideshare to the hotel, and his father called me to make sure everything was okay. My dad then drove 4 hours at 11 p.m. to pick me up. Story 75. I referred to Chappell Roan as still being quite young in a discussion recently and was criticized for infantilizing women artists. I didn't mean anything negative by it, but people under 30 still seem young to me. I understand why the comment was made. Story 76. Getting injuries from activities like high-intensity interval training has prompted me to reevaluate my approach. It's not too challenging, but injuries tend to take longer to heal as we age. Story 77. My family goes to my aunt's house for a Christmas party. The adults don't exchange presents, and when I was 18, I did not receive a present. Story 78. When I was around 16, I realized I had a challenging childhood. I started asking adult questions that even my parents couldn't answer. For example, I would ask if the rent was going to be paid or if I needed to contribute money for groceries. A few times, my parents relied on my part-time job to cover the last bit of bills, such as $200 for rent or $150 for groceries. I eventually understood that I didn't have a typical childhood, and that it ended probably closer to when I was 14 or 15, if not earlier due to the complicated and difficult family dynamic I endured. Life is tough. Story 79. My extended family gathers on Christmas Eve, but everyone only brings presents for the children to open that night. This includes me and all my cousins, even those of us who are already adults. A few weeks before Christmas, I informed my family members that I was pregnant, so my gifts that year were all for the baby instead of for me. I officially realized I wasn't one of the kids any longer. Story 80. I saw an old photo of myself before my beard turned mostly gray and white, but my face looks pretty much the same. I have barely aged in the last 10 years. Story 81. Years ago, one of the major theaters in Boston received a large donation from Dr. Wong of Wong Computers fame and was subsequently renamed in his honor. Fast forward a while, and I was a freshman at one of the nearby universities, working in the school's theater department as a technician. One day, while working, I was discussing with my supervisor the different venues in town and the amount of space they had backstage and in the wings. At one point, he remarked that the Wong is enormous. I knew I couldn't laugh. I resisted the urge, and in that moment, I realized I had grown up. Story 82. I'm 27, and I'm still waiting for the realization to hit. At this point, part of me hopes it never does. Story 83. When I moved in with my dad at 16, he told me that I had to work to pay my bills or live with my mom. Story 84. When I received a letter in the mail in March of 1966 stating, "Greetings, you will report to your local draft board on April 5th at 7 a.m. Today I am a man." Story 85. I realized I wasn't a kid anymore when my child graduated from university and asked me to stop doing bunny ears in all the photos. Story 86. I had to catch a cockroach in front of my fiancée. You may think it is not a big deal, but that roach was from the New York subway and it was huge. I've seen smaller baby shoes. I had to step up and deal with the situation, whack it with a slipper before it grew any bigger and became a real problem. Story 87. I have to pay taxes every day. Then both you and your friends become busier because we all have our own lives to live. Story 88. When my mom died, suddenly every aspect of the support system I had was gone. There were no more chances, no room for failure. Jobs couldn't simply not work out. There was no one to call if I was truly hungry. There was no one left. Story 89. Oh, I'm still a kid. I just don't have a youthful, innocent mind anymore, and I hate myself for it. Story 90. A few months ago, I attended an Alice concert where the opening act was Joan Jett. After her performance, I was ready to leave, but my friend, who is in her 20s, reminded me that there was more of the concert to enjoy. Story 91. When I realized my parents were not truthful, it happened not just once or twice, but continually and for no reason. Losing that trust made me gain a lot of faith in myself. Story 92. My story is still being written. My main character is leaning towards becoming a villain, but there is still hope. His redemption lies in his son. Probably began when my mother died when I was 17. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.